If we can please turn in our Bibles to the book of St. Luke, chapter 8. The book of St. Luke, the 8th chapter. And we're going to look at verse 22 through verse 25. I'm going to read the text out of the New King James Version, beginning with verse 22. Now it happened on a certain day that he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side of the lake." And they launched out. But as they sailed, he fell asleep, and a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. But he said to them, "Where is your faith?" And they were afraid and marveled, saying to one another, "Who can this be? For he commands even the winds and water, and they obey him." Amen. Well, Jesus, in the context of this passage, he's been trying to, as you well know, instill faith and trust in him through his disciples. He's been training them. And this is in the process of him training them. Shall we say this was another classroom exercise that he had for these disciples. They didn't know it at the time, but definitely it was. But for you and I to understand at least where we're coming from this morning, there's a lot of storms, spiritual storms, that befall human beings and especially believers as well. Now, some of those storms may be as a result of our own bad decision making. Maybe they might be as a result of a bad diet, or it might be financial decisions that we didn't take the advice when we should have took that advice because it would have turned out differently, or we might have just forgotten to consult God and made decisions that ended up bringing about certain storms in our life that spiraled out of control. And especially if we ignore his teaching where it says that we are not to be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Well, if you're going to go into business with someone who's not a believer, then there's going to be natural tension because your worldview and that other person's worldview will collide. Same thing in terms of finding someone that you plan on marrying. You want to make sure that you're not unequally yoked, because if you make that decision, guess what? You're going to invite storms that shouldn't be there in the first place, but because of your bad decision making and we've ignored the teachings of Scripture, we find ourselves right in the eye of these storms. But for us believers, not every storm that befalls you and I is a result of our negligence, sin, or shortcomings. Some storms actually come to us as believers as a result of the fact is that you and I are walking in perfect obedience to God. And those storms come in order to develop us, in order to strengthen our faith and trust in God. And this is one of these storms. Now, we just read the text. So what's happening here, Jesus is intent on going to the other side of the Lake of Galilee because there's demon-possessed individuals in a city called Gadara that need his power and assistance to deliver them. The disciples don't know this. Of course, he's already prepared for this. So in this situation here, notice he's giving the disciples a command. And he says, you know what? I need you guys to get into the boat. Now, notice he's going to get into the boat with them, but he says, let's get into the boat and we're going to go to the other side. It's framed as a command, but also a promise. In other words, we're going to the other side. This is what Jesus said. Jesus is fixated that we're going to enter the boat and we're going to get over to the other side. So, as a result, they're going to find themselves in the middle of this storm. And the reason they find themselves in the middle of this storm is because they're in the perfect will of God. It's not through any means that they've done that's wrong. This is merely God intervening because he's going to use this storm in order to develop them spiritually, because it's what Jesus has been doing. He's trying to train them to take his place. So let's take a look at a couple of observations that we can make here. Number one, let's look at verse 22 again. I'm going to read it this time out of the Amplified Version. And it says, "Now on one of those days, Jesus and his disciples got into a boat, and he said to them, 'Let us cross over to the other side of the lake, Sea of Galilee.' So they set out." Notice, Jesus is the one that's encouraging them to walk into this storm. John didn't come up with this idea. Peter didn't come up with the idea. This was Jesus' idea. Everything was going fine, but now Jesus said, listen, we need to get into the boat, and I want to cross over because we need to get to the other side. I'm intent on getting to the other side. So he's the one that literally is encouraging them to walk in the midst of a storm, which they don't even realize it's a storm. But notice, it's not through anything that they've done. Basically, it's his idea, and he wants them to accompany him. But the good thing, or it should have motivated the disciples to be encouraged and have faith, is that he's in the boat with them. Notice, he's encouraging them to walk right into this storm, but Jesus is going to go along with them right in the middle of this storm. But here I just want to underscore, this wasn't their idea. They're faithfully serving God. Remember, they're being obedient. He's telling them, we're going to go to the other side, and they're like, yes, Lord, okay, we will go. Notice, no one raises up any type of pushback. If he wants to go to the other side, he's our Lord and Master. We want to obey, so if he's going, we're going. But notice, it was Jesus that encouraged them to walk into this storm. Not the devil, not anyone else, not their own shortcomings, not a bad decision that they made. This storm is coming as a direct result of Jesus guiding and directing them. But is that even possible? Why would God do that? Simply because, once again, the storms that he brings about in our lives, in other words, that he's the one that's behind them, not through anything that we've done. I just want to underscore this again. Point number one, he is encouraging his own disciples that are being completely obedient to him to literally walk into this storm that's about to take place. And he's not doing it to destroy them, he's doing it to develop them. God's always worked that way. We see that repeatedly in the Old Testament. In fact, let's go to the book of Deuteronomy, please. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8. We're going to look at the first 3 verses. Deuteronomy, the 8th chapter. And as you know, the Israelites at this time in its history that's being referred to here, they're wandering in the wilderness. Their journey's about to end after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Now, you know why they were wandering in the wilderness, because of their disobedience. Remember, God wanted to bring them into the promised land. The spies discouraged the people. Joshua and Caleb are saying, listen, what they're saying is true, but we have God on our side. We can take them. If God is with us, no one can withstand us. Well, unfortunately, they ignored the advice of Joshua and Caleb and took the advice of the 10 spies, which discouraged them, and as a result, God sentenced them to 40 years in the wilderness, or shall we say they sentenced themselves to 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So they're in this wilderness, and so why would God, remember, he's the one, after they said no, they would not enter the promised land, it was God's idea for them now to wander in the wilderness. Not their idea, this was God's idea. So he's literally leading this nation into a barren wilderness for 40 years. Similar to the situation here, he's encouraging these disciples to walk right in the middle of the storm, but I want to pick at least this thought from this passage here in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Let's look at the first 3 verses, please. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 1 through verse 3. Every commandment which I command you today, you must be careful to observe, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers. And you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you, to test you, and to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you and allowed you to hunger and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. In other words, he's telling us here that the reason he led them, notice he's the one that orchestrated this. He's telling them, since you don't want to go to the promised land, this is what we're going to do. It wasn't their idea, it was his idea. So he sends them literally into a barren wilderness for 40 years. But he tells them why he's doing it. Not necessarily to destroy them, but in other words, for them to get to the place where they don't repeat the same, of course, mistake again. But he was the one that led them there. We're told here clearly he did it, what? To test them, to examine them, to see if indeed they would really serve God or not. And this is the situation we have going on in Luke chapter 8. Jesus is trying to develop these disciples. He's trying to get them to have faith and confidence in him, to trust him in all circumstances. Well, of course, they've been listening to a lot of things that he's been saying, and probably at this time they're wondering, hey, we've got this whole faith thing down pat. And the key thing is that they didn't, obviously. But here, the first thought I just want to leave us with, the first observation we see here is that sometimes in our spiritual journey in walking with God, the storms that you and I will encounter are not necessarily as a result of anything that we've done. In fact, it could be a direct result because we are being obedient to God. And as a result, he's still trying to develop us and help us to grow. And this is the only way that he can do it. And so he's the one that encouraged his disciples, we're going to get in the boat and we're going to go to the other side. And so he's hoping, and in this particular case, to the credit of the disciples, they don't question him because they feel he must know what he's doing. He's our master. He's telling us to do something. We will obey. Notice they're in the perfect will of God, and yet they're going to be led into a storm. Now imagine this is going to be a very dangerous storm, as we see. Let's read verse 23 through the first portion of verse 24. I'm going to read it out of the Amplified Version. So he encourages them to walk into the storm. And secondly, we find out here that he's going to examine them while they are in this storm. Luke chapter 8, verse 23 through the first portion of verse 24. But as they were sailing, he fell asleep, and a fierce gale of wind swept down as if a wind tunnel on the lake, and they began to be swamped, and they were in great danger. Then they came to Jesus and woke him, saying, Master, Master, we are about to die. And we'll leave it there. Notice, now these are, the people in this boat are experienced fishermen. At least Peter, Andrew, James, and John, this is what they do for a living. It's not the first time they've taken a boat ride on the Lake of Galilee. So it's not like they're not accustomed to something of this nature, at least happening. But apparently, this particular storm literally frightened them. Imagine, Jesus is the one that encouraged them to walk in the midst of this storm. It's a very dangerous storm. They're panicking. And here's the thing. What they don't realize is that the storm, as dangerous as it was not as dangerous as the unbelief in their hearts. Because we find out here is that Jesus is in the boat. He's already told them we're going to the other side. Rather than say to themselves, well, no, he told us we're going to the other side. If we're going to the other side, let's trust that we're going to get there because after all, he's in the boat. So here he's in the boat, and get this, he's so exhausted from his prior ministry and teaching that he falls asleep in the middle of this storm. He's sound asleep. They're panicking. They can see with their eyes the waves. And then from within, they're full of fear. So you've got the waves causing panic, and then inside, obviously, if they really had the faith that they should have, they would not be panicking, because they would say immediately, first of all, he said we'd get to the other side. And secondly, so long as he's on the boat, God's not going to let anything happen. We're going to get to our destination. That's not where they go. They go where most of us would go. I'm sure if we were in the same situation, we would do the same thing. And imagine, these are experienced fishermen. It's not like this is their first time on the Lake of Galilee. And what happens here, in fact, my understanding is that the winds come down from the mountain. Now remember, the Sea of Galilee is like 600 feet below sea level. So it's a basin. It's almost like a bowl. So these winds come down, and when the hot air and the cool air in that basin collide, guess what? A storm is possible. I saw one video with my sister recently where we see those waves. At that time, I think they were about 10 to 12 feet high on Galilee. I understand it could go as much as 20 on some cases. In fact, the Bible teacher and former pastor Warren Worsby of the Moody Church, he tells of a story where he took a group there on one of these tours, and they were going from Tiberias to Capernaum on the Lake of Galilee. And so he happens to ask the tour guide that's on the boat, have you ever encountered a storm on Lake Galilee? And when Pastor Worsby asked him that question, his eyes wide open, he says, oh yes, he said, and he says, listen, I pray to God I never have to go through one of those ever again. And this is what they're in. Now, this one in particular seems to be sent in order to keep Jesus from getting onto the other side. Because remember, on the other side where they're going to arrive in Gadara, there's these demon-possessed men that need deliverance. And you can imagine Satan is not unaware of that fact. So more than likely, this storm was not as a random act of nature, and certainly God the Father is not one that orchestrated, but maybe it was sent by Satan to either destroy Jesus or at least hinder him from getting to Gadara, because he has these two men, individuals in chains and bound, and he doesn't want them delivered. But in either case, notice he's fast asleep on the boat. They're panicking because of the waves that they see and then the waves that are going on inside. They're fearful inside, and they could look around them, all there is in fear. And so here, notice, since Jesus is asleep, he leads them in this storm. Why? To examine them once again. To do what? To test them. To test what? Their faith. Do they have faith and confidence that when he says something, it will be completed? Do they believe that indeed he's the Son of God? Do they believe that God the Father is not going to let anything happen to his Son until he completes his mission for dying for the sins of humanity? You think that he's going to let anyone or any storm or any entity stop him from doing that? Now, of course, you and I, we now see that because we have the complete story and we can look back. They didn't have this. They're going in real time through this whole situation. And from their perspective, put yourself in their position. They're in complete obedience to God. We see here that literally they crowd in fear. They're trying to wake him up. I can imagine this is what they were thinking. Hey, what's the big idea? We're your disciples. We've willingly submitted to you. We're bent on serving you. Why would you lead us in such a storm and on top of that fall asleep while we're in the middle of this storm? Those are the things that you and I think about when we're in these type of storms. Well, Lord, I'm doing everything you're telling me to do. I'm reading my Bible, I'm praying, I'm seeking God, I'm gathering with believers alike precious faith. I'm doing everything to the best of my ability through your grace and through your mercy and the power of your Spirit to serve you. What's the big idea? I mean, well, what's going on here? Why this storm? Well, obviously, if God has permitted this storm, and we see here that not only did he permit the storm, he's the one that literally is leading the disciples in the middle of it. He's doing it to examine them, to test them, to test their faith. We just read that in Deuteronomy. He said, the reason I brought you to this barren wilderness was to what? Test you, to prove you, to examine you, to see if indeed what? You'll obey me. You'll keep my commandments. So that I can find out whether you really love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul. You say you do. But see, God's not interested in words. He wants to know from our hearts. And again, in situations of this nature, this is how he examines us. He tests us. And it's not to test us to destroy us, but so that he can hold up this trial per se as a mirror. In fact, let's go to the corresponding passage in the book of Mark chapter 4, please. Book of Mark chapter 4. Because this is what Jesus was after, to develop in them. He's trying to strengthen their faith, their confidence in him. And the only way that he felt he could do that at this point in their spiritual journey and development was to bring them into this storm. And while they're in this storm, notice, he's fast asleep. They're panicking. They're fearful. And we read here, Master, Master, we're about to die. Wake up. How can you be sleeping in the middle of this storm? Imagine, these are experienced fishermen, and they're in panic mode. Mark chapter 4, verse 38, please. Notice what it says. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Notice, it's not a question of that, Lord, help us. Notice what they're implying. Again, we have a saying, hey, what's the big idea? This is where they're at. They're like, don't you care that we're perishing? I can't believe you're sleeping on the boat in the middle of this storm, which, if I remember correctly, you're the one that brought us into this storm. You're fast asleep. What's the big idea? Do you care that we're perishing? Can you imagine? This is what they're telling Jesus. Well, where is their faith? Well, of course, Jesus knows they don't have that kind of faith as yet. But in order to develop that faith, he's using this storm that he leads them into so that they can come to this place, because after all, what he wants them to understand, listen, here's what Jesus is getting at. Do you trust my guidance? Do you trust my guidance in the midst of a storm? Well, apparently in this particular case, under these circumstances, the answer to the disciples was obviously not, because they're questioning his guidance, and they're questioning his guidance in the midst of this type of storm. Why is he sleeping? Obviously, he doesn't care if we perish, because who would be asleep under these circumstances? And we're here because we're walking in obedience. He told us, and we obeyed, and now all of a sudden he falls asleep. Well, but the point they're missing is that he's still in the boat. They didn't leave without Jesus. Jesus is traveling with them. See, and faith would say was whether he appears to be sleeping or not, maybe he's testing us. See, maybe he's testing us. But apparently, this is not the conclusion they came to. The conclusion they came to, don't you care? I mean, what's the big idea? I mean, is this how we've given everything to follow you. What's going on here? Which brings us to our last point. So, he encourages them to walk into this storm. He's going to deliberately use the storm that he himself has allowed to occur in order to examine them, to test their faith, to see if they can trust his guidance, and especially guidance in the midst of a storm of this nature. And the third point is this. As a result of what's going to happen, in fact, let's read the second portion of verse 24 and verse 25. I'll read the second portion, Amplified Version again. And it says, He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging, violent waves, and they ceased, and it became a calm, a perfect peacefulness. Verse 25. And he said to them, Where is your faith, your confidence in me? And they were afraid and astonished, saying to one another, Who then is this, that he commands even the winds and the sea, and they obey him? So let me ask you, what was the real problem? Was the real problem the storm, or was it the unbelief in their hearts that was even more severe than the storm? From Jesus' perspective, it was the unbelief that he was after. Notice, he, in the spiritual development of these disciples, under these circumstances, Jesus knows. Listen, you know what? I'm going to use this storm as a way to enlighten them. So in other words, he's going to enlighten them as a result of the storm. That's the third point. He's going to enlighten them as a result of the storm. He's going to take this whole situation, their response, their unbelief to this situation, as a way to enlighten them or educate them concerning what? Their lack of faith. He's asking them here, where is your faith and confidence in me? Well, if you were to ask these disciples, they would have said, well, we have faith in Jesus. That's why we got in the boat in the first place. Well, apparently not to Jesus' satisfaction, because apparently they didn't understand a character trait of Christ. He was trying to develop in these disciples so they can understand that no matter what storm, spiritual storm, may cross our path, Jesus is not only able to take care of the storm and to calm. We read here, notice this, who could have calmed this? He basically gets up. Remember, he's sound asleep. They wake him up. Notice he doesn't berate them. He doesn't take the time and say, what's your problem? I mean, seriously, what is your problem? No, he doesn't go there. He first and foremost what? He calms the reason for their agitation. Literally, only God can do this. Basically, Lake Galilee went still. They look and they're like, whoa, what just happened? And now they're like, who is this person that we've been following? It says here, it spooked them. Because they understand only God can do something like that. This guy is even Lord over nature. I mean, literally, it says here, if he commands the winds and the water, it obeys him. And they're like, who is this? Well, obviously, he's trying to reveal himself to these disciples so that then when they find themselves in this situation, they understand, oh, the Jesus we're serving, he's God over nature. Even if something of this nature, Jesus he'll take care of this. They weren't at this place spiritually any more than some of us are. But this is what Jesus did in this particular case. He says, you know what? He deliberately leads them in the middle of the storm. He's going to test them through this storm. And then once in this case, they failed the test. They didn't pass it. They failed. They basically accused him of negligence, of treating them other than, I thought we're your friends. I thought we're disciples. You don't care that we perish. Hey, okay, what's the big idea here? We are in this boat because you're the one that told us to get in the boat. We obeyed you. We're in your perfect center of your will. So what's this about? Well, it wasn't to destroy him. This is what Jesus was after. He had his moment, okay? The classroom now is in a boat in the middle of the storm, and Jesus takes the opportunity once again to teach him a lesson. In this particular case, you guys, obviously you're still not where you need to be. He says, where's your faith? Where's your confidence in me? Obviously, that went out the door as soon as the storm came. Go, if you would, to the parallel passage in the book of Matthew, please. Matthew, the 8th chapter. Matthew chapter 8. Same story, different perspective. Matthew, another passage says, why is it you have no faith? Here, notice what it says here. Verse 25 through verse 27 of Matthew, the 8th chapter. We read, then his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we are perishing. But he said to them, why are you fearful, O you of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. So the men marveled, saying, who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Well, again, I ask you, the only one that can calm that type of storm on that lake with a simple word, only God can do that. And the reason scholars believe this was more so a satanically inspired storm is because when Jesus gets up and rebukes the wind, he's not rebuking his Father. He's not rebuking himself. That storm was sent purposely by Satan, what? To either destroy Jesus or to keep him from getting to Gadara, because he does not want these two demon-possessed people delivered. Disciples don't know anything about this, but he's taken an opportunity. You know what? We can move the classroom into the boat. But notice, he takes it as an opportunity not to talk down to them to the point where they can't lift themselves up. He uses it as an opportunity to say, where's your faith? Why is it that you have no faith? And they couldn't say anything is because you failed the test. Did you think I was going to let the boat drown? Do you think my Father's not going to bring me over to the... I told you we're going to the other side. That was a promise. Have I ever broken a promise to you? They don't know this as yet. He's trying to lead them there. I have a cross to get you. I'm not going to leave here until I'm finished with my assignment that I have my Heavenly Father. They don't know this, but he's trying to develop their faith. And the only way to do this is as a result of these storms. And in his case, notice, This is not a storm they brought upon themselves. We human beings, and especially believers, we have a way of allowing certain storms which we've created, and then God has to rescue us. No, this is a totally different one. This is a storm that Jesus is orchestrating to develop us spiritually, and it's not to destroy us, but it's to examine us. We just read it in Deuteronomy. He tells them why he led them in the wilderness. Of all places, I can imagine, why this wilderness? Couldn't we go? No, he led them into a barren wilderness for 40 years. And he tells them the reason he did it. I did it to test you, to examine you, to see if you would love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And that so that you can understand your life doesn't consist just of physical eating and what you need. You need spiritual food. So that you can understand, man will not live by bread alone, but you need my words. You need spiritual nourishment. That's why I led you in this wilderness. He's explained to the disciples here. This is the lesson. He says, why is it that you have no faith? And when the disciples saw what happened to Lake Galilee, they can only come to one conclusion. The reason they were terrified as a result of this calm is because they realized this isn't no ordinary man in this boat. I mean, seriously, who can speak to the waves and the winds and they obey him? Only God can do something like that. Exactly. Let's look at two passages out of the book of Psalms. Jesus is fulfilling these passages. And again, the fact that he was able to calm that storm that he led them into is because he's trying to show them, you don't understand, I'm God over nature. Storms of this nature, I am in control. The reason why Jesus was sleeping on the boat is because he knows, my heavenly Father's in control. Psalm 89, please. Psalm 89 and verse 9, please. Psalm 89 and verse 9. You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them. Let me read that again. You rule the raging of the sea. This is speaking about God. When its waves rise, you still them. Psalm 107. Psalm 107, and we're going to look at verse number 29, please. Psalm 107 and verse 29. This was the lesson he was trying to get across to the disciples. They thought they knew who was with them on the boat. They had been learning things about Jesus. He works miracles. We know that. But they found out another aspect of the Jesus they're serving, and he purposely wanted to show them this. Why? To strengthen their faith. He says, why is it that you have no faith? Why is it that you have little faith? Why is it you have no confidence in me? That's the question he asked them. And as you notice, they didn't provide much of an answer other than they were astonished at what they saw. We read this, Psalm 107 and verse 29. He calms the storm, speaking of God, so that its waves are still. Read that again. He calms the storm so that its waves are still. An act of God. And now, it wasn't lost on the disciples. When they saw what Jesus did, they're like, whoa, only God can do this. Who is this that's in the boat with us? He is no ordinary man or an ordinary Messiah. There's something divine about him, and that's the exact lesson that Jesus wanted to teach them. And this is why he asked them, how is it that you have no faith? So what he does, he provides evidence for them to believe and trust in him. You would think that this would have cured the unbelief in their hearts, but you and I both know as we continue to read the Gospels, there were other lessons they needed to learn. But God is patient. He was patient with these disciples. But I just want to leave us with this morning that, again, Jesus was behind this particular storm that these disciples encountered in their spiritual journey. He was behind it. He led them into this storm. He encouraged them to walk right into it. And while they're in the eye of this storm, he chooses the opportunity, you know what? I'm going to test them. And once they are tested, and in this case they failed this test, he takes the opportunity, as a result of their failure in this test, to enlighten them, to educate them, so that they can understand, listen, apparently you guys lack faith. Because if you really believe me, why is it that you're panicking? When they saw what he did, they realized, oh, we just read it here. Who is this? Jesus, that we're following, that even the winds and the waves, they obey him. Well, obviously, the conclusion, he's God, he's divine. And so do you think that a divine person, the Son of the living God, you think his Father's going to let anything happen to him until his mission is complete? The answer is no. But see, at this time, they don't understand this. He's trying to develop their faith. So a lot of times, you and I, we may not like these particular storms. Sometimes we even give Satan credit for the storms that Jesus is the one that's actually allowing us to enter. There are certain things we can give Satan credit for, that he's out to discourage us, destroy us, bring us to despair. But sometimes we're even giving him credit for the work that Jesus is actually doing. In this particular case, Satan was not the one that led these disciples in the middle of the storm. Jesus did. And he did it purposely to examine them. That depending on how they passed this test, even though he was sleeping, it was lost. He's still in the boat. I can understand if he wasn't in the boat, but he's actually in the boat. He might be sleeping, but he's in the boat. Sometimes you and I have that same perception. We're in the middle of this thing, and God is sleeping. I'm praying, but he's still not answering. I don't see him, but he's in the boat. We should be encouraged that no matter what storm of this nature that he would lead us to, he's in the boat with us. Like the disciples, we may come to the conclusion he's fast asleep, but he's still in the boat. Even though he may be silent temporarily, maybe, just maybe, he's testing me. You know what? Maybe God's examining, maybe he's trying to develop my faith. Maybe I'm not at the place I should be, because why would Jesus permit something like this to happen? He wouldn't purposely send me in the middle of the storm without some type of motivation, and it's a good motivation. He's not out to destroy me, he's out to encourage me. Now, Satan sent the storm to try to destroy Jesus, or at least hinder him from getting to the other side. Jesus used the storm for a different purpose. He used it to develop his disciples to become the type of men that when he left, they would be the apostles they ultimately became. There's no way of doing this without these particular storms. So it's an encouragement to me, because the thing that blessed me about this passage is that, notice Jesus could have taken the opportunity to say, listen, what's wrong with you people? I mean, how many times do we have to do this? I mean, are you dense? Talk down to them. He doesn't go there. He basically gets up, calms the sea, and just asks him a simple question. Where's your faith? I'm sure that enough was conviction, because when they saw what happened, they're like, okay. Obviously, they didn't know Jesus to the degree they should, and he's showing them another part of a character. He's trying to get across, listen, a storm of this nature, it's no problem for me. It should be no problem for you. If I'm in the boat, what's your problem? We can take a lot of encouragement, because I always cut apostles and disciples slack, because you and I at least have a Bible. We can look at their mistakes and say, why did they do something like that? Well, you're not in the boat. This is in real time, and it's here to encourage us that, you know what? God is patient. He was patient with Peter, James, right? And Andrew, John. And ultimately, you know the type of individuals they ultimately became. So let's be encouraged. Let me leave you with this once again. Jesus is behind some of the storms we may encounter along our spiritual journey. Don't let that surprise you. Don't let that discourage you. We just read it here. It's part of our spiritual development. And if he thinks it's necessary for me to be brought into the midst of the eye of the storm in order to make me more Christ-like, then I have faith that he knows what he's doing. And when I come out of this, just like Job, remember one of the most beautiful things Job ever said? He understood God's behind this. He said, but when he has tried me, he said, remember, I shall come forth as gold. And that's exactly what he wants to do with us. Amen.
We would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. We sincerely hope that this podcast has been a blessing to you and encourages you to draw closer to the Lord Jesus Christ. The Christ for the City podcast is a ministry of the Burning Bush Tabernacle Church in Chicago, Illinois.